Bat family, and welcome to Holy BatCast, brought to you by real fans for real movies. You can find us all over the internet, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast and you'll find us. We are also on Patreon. If you want to support us that way, you can do that. You can go to patreon.com/holybatcast. No pressure. It's all good, but it's an option if you want to do that. And thank you to everybody who has done that. We certainly appreciate you guys. You make it that much easier to keep the show rolling. We're a proud part of the Real Fans Podcast Network. So if you're looking for other shows to check out, you can check those out at rf4rm.com. And as always, I'm Andy DiGenova. You can find me on Threads, Instagram, and Letterboxd. It's always just my name, Andy DiGenova. And this episode, we are going to be talking about the soft launch of the DCU. And I'm going to say very soft launch, but technically it's part of DC Studios. We're talking about Creature Commandos, the new animated series that just premiered on Max this week. And I have a very special guest joining me to talk about Creature Commandos. You know him, you love him. He pops in on this show on occasion. He has all of his own shows going. He's part of the reason I started podcasting in the first place. So thank you or damn you, I can't decide. Regardless, it's Sean Gerber. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Andy. Thank you for having me, and I'm so sorry.
I know it's ridiculous. But yeah, it's good to have you back. And it's been a minute since we've chatted actually, like, with audio as opposed to just in text. But yeah, I'm always happy to have you on to talk a little DC and especially to talk about, brand new DC content.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to be here for this show. As you said, soft launch of the DCU under James Gunn, who, of course, is featured in the opening titles of this show. And so I'm so happy. I mean, we had a chance to talk about this, and you were nice enough to bring me on when James Gunn, we found out he was going to be running things with Peter Safran in the DCU. So to have this first little piece of it, and I think soft launch is totally the right phrase for it. But nevertheless, it's here now, and I am really thrilled. I was thrilled to have an opportunity to see how it would start with Creature Commandos, but also how it kind of, venturing on spoiler territory, just opening in the show, how it kind of carries over what's already happened and what's kind of being grandfathered in to the new DCU. So to start to just kind of see how this all fits was a lot of fun. And of course, it's a tiny, tiny little glimpse. And we're, of course, going to have to wait for Superman. But for now, it's Creature Commandos, and I'm having fun with it.
Awesome. Well, great. We're going to talk about that, and I'm excited. And yeah, that was part of the reason I thought of you is you and I, were tracking the whole launch of the new DCU, especially once James Gunn got the gig. And so I was like, well, this is it, I guess. So maybe Sean will be around. And so I'm glad that you're here. Before we get to talking about the show, though, I want to get a little housekeeping out of the way because out there, folks listening, you probably noticed there hasn't been a new episode in a few weeks. And I warned y'all that was going to happen. I warned you when the baby came. I just didn't know what scheduling was going to look like. And sure enough, this is what we're dealing with. So y'all know that Andy Jr. was born on October 10th. And for a couple of weeks, I was able to do new episodes because first he was in the hospital for about a week. And then I had my mother-in-law here kind of backing us up. So it was a little easy to just go, well, I'm going to go to my office for 2 hours and I'll be right back. But now it's just me and Catherine and the two kids. And so finding the time to record is even trickier than I expected. So yeah, the episodes, I will get to them when I can, but I know that y'all hopefully understand that just with the juggling of the brand new baby, plus a toddler, plus life in general, it's just going to be a little irregular for a while. And so I thank you in advance for your patience, but it's going to happen. There's going to be gaps, and then I'm going to try my best to keep the episodes rolling. And then hopefully within a couple months, we'll find kind of a new happy equilibrium of life where this can happen on a more regular schedule the way you all have become accustomed to it. So that's all. I at least wanted to acknowledge the elephant in the room because I had the best intentions of doing a Thanksgiving episode, and that didn't happen. Thanksgiving came and went, and there was just no way to make it happen. So I'm going to do my best, but again, be flexible for at least a few months, and I'm hoping that life will find a new normal in there somewhere. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk DCU. Let's talk Creature Commandos. It's time to discuss at least the first two episodes of James Gunn's Creature Commandos. And he at least wrote the first 2 episodes. I think he might have written them all, honestly. I feel like he said that. Do you remember, Sean? I can't remember.
That
But
sounds right to me also. I
yeah,
believe
that's
that was I think he mentioned that was one of the first things he just kind of immediately wrote and had an idea for and just ran with as soon as he was getting involved on for the DCU on a larger scale.
yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned, I appreciate that he gets his own animated credit in the
Yes.
opening.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure, I mean, why wouldn't he? But I think it's a smart thing to do. I mean, I know there's obviously not going to be the eyes on this that there will be on the feature films or even live action series from the DCU, similar to how the animated numbers from what we know of them from Disney Plus for the Marvel shows pales in comparison to what the live action shows do, and those numbers pale in comparison to what the feature films do. But nevertheless, it's kind of cool to have James Gunn right there at the center of it because he is going to be the face of the DCU moving forward, even though he's not running it entirely by himself, he is going to be the face of it. So go ahead and put that face in animated form, and he deserves it because he wrote this. And without James Gunn, we don't have a Creature Commandos show. So you can credit him or you can blame him, depending on how much you're enjoying the show thus far. But this is part of why I was excited about James Gunn taking over the DCU, because this is the kind of thing he would bring to it. Obviously, he wrote and directed a Superman movie that we all can't wait to see. But James Gunn gets just as excited about these characters as he does characters like Superman, which a lot of people will say. But for James Gunn and anybody who knows his history, and he followed him on social media for long enough when he's sharing the stacks of comic books he was reading before he was hired to direct a lot of comic book movies, he's just as into all of this stuff. And that's what I've always admired about James Gunn, especially as a creative voice and visionary in this space. And that's why a huge part of why I'm excited for Creature Commandos is just the fact that we get to have it.
yeah, absolutely. And um, all that is very accurate, and it is funny that he's definitely the face, even though he is co-running it with Peter Safran. But I think that Peter Safran, like most producers, like most good producers, they're happy to help make things work behind the curtain, but they let someone else kind of be the face, and it seems like that's definitely the case here. And James Gunn is that face, and putting himself in the animated opening, I could see some people maybe squinting at it, but I think it's fun personally. And yeah, it's just step one on many things that are to come. And
He gives himself a cameo in Superman. Let's talk about it. But
right,
for Creature Commandos, it's fine.
I mean, he popped up in animated form in the Harley Quinn animated series, and that
Right.
was before he was even in charge. So
Exactly.
he loves the stuff. He wants to be a part of the party, and you know what? It's his party, so that's fine by me.
Yeah.
We have 2 episodes. They both launched on December 5th on Max. I have watched them both. I know you have as well. First thing I want to acknowledge is that on our last episode, we talked about Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, which was also a DC Studios release, even though they didn't produce it themselves. But it had that DC Studios intro logo of the very old school Superman, and then it flipping around to the DC. And I asked the question, I'm like, is it always going to be Superman, or will that character change based on the project? And at least for now, it seems like it will always be Superman, because for Creature Commandos, it's still Superman.
Yeah, and Superman so far is nowhere near this show, and I wouldn't anticipate that he's going to be. And so I did also think that was interesting, and I but I kind of like it. I mean, I think there's probably natural points at which it could evolve over time, and I would say we're probably going to see this logo at least through Superman next year, and then let's see what happens if we get closer, if we start to approach another major feature film release, because yeah, I mean, Batman's got to be in the logo at some point. So
Yeah, I mean, that's that's the important thing.
I figure that's what you're driving at, and I totally agree.
Well, more or less, but like like there was the old kind of flipping pages. Well, no, the flipping pages was Marvel, and then
Mhm.
there was something kind of similar with DC. 2 logos ago, was it, where you saw images that were usually from
Mhm.
the universe that we were about to watch, and so I just wondered if this would be the same. But yeah, there's certainly time for that to be the case. But for now, they're really just they want to make that branding clear, and so I understand just keeping Superman at least for a while.
Mhm.
Um, as for the cast, we already know this cast, but now that we're hearing them and seeing them, and one of the fun things about this cast is they are all cast so they could play these same characters in live action. And looking at them, it's like, yeah, that all makes perfect sense. So Indira Varma is the bride. Frank Grillo is Rick Flag Sr., and we know we're going to see him play the same character in live action come Peacemaker Season 2. Sean Gunn is G.I. Robot and Weasel. Zoe Chow is Nina Mazursky. David Harbour is Frankenstein. And I think that's the main... Oh, wait, no, Alan Tudyk is Phosphorus. So, let's start spoiler-free reactions. You already gave us a little taste of that, Sean, but 2 episodes in, your spoiler-free thoughts on Creature Commandos.
Well, we joked before the show started in that I wasn't completely over the moon with the show, so that by internet law means I think it's terrible. But no, more seriously, I really enjoyed these first 2 episodes. I had a lot of fun with them, and I think all the characters I think are working really, really well. I could take or leave Weasel. It is what it is, but I'm glad Sean Gunn also give us GI Robot.
I'm with you on that, and I think that me and Brendan even joked about that as like trying to make Weasel a thing, but I really don't need him.
Yeah, Weasel can go the way of Fetch, so I really don't understand like that one. I'm a little but I'm glad that Sean Gunn has an additional character to get to play because GI Robot is a lot of fun so far through these first 2 episodes. And it sounds like based on the preview of next week's episode, that's where we'll get a little more focus on GI Robot and backstory and stuff like that, which I am excited about. But the rest of the other characters are working very well. I do think with Phosphorus, though, there's a little bit of this is kind of when you bring in Alan Tudyk, you have him do some of this, which is not to say he can only do this. Alan Tudyk is an incredibly versatile actor who can do lots of things, but sometimes when he does voices, it kind of leans into some of this territory that we see with Phosphorus. But I'm really enjoying Indira Varma as the bride. She is excellent in this. Frank Grillo as Rick Flag Sr., and it's a little different so far, I think, with from what I'm used to for what they're doing with David Harbour's Frankenstein, and maybe even a little different from what I initially anticipated. But I kind of like that they didn't just have David Harbour do automatically what you might expect David Harbour to do in the series. And then the overall story with it, I think, is working very well so far. So I am having a lot of fun with the series. It's not necessarily the biggest deep dive and most introspective character work that I've seen, although they get into some of that with the second episode. So suffice to say, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's very James Gunn. And I have, it's pretty much what I anticipated from the show with, again, a few surprises and just how interesting the story is with characters like the bride.
Yeah, I think that we're very much on the same page because I agree with you. I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes. I thought they were a lot of fun. I was very entertained. And I think for me, the strong point is the characters. I pretty much like them all, like you said, with the exception of Weasel. I think they're all fun and they're interesting and they're entertaining. And when I finished those, I wanted to see more of them. And I think that really works well for it. I also came out thinking exactly what you just said is it's very James Gunn. For better and for worse. Like, so if you're coming into this and you go, I don't know what I think. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if I'm going to like it. Watch James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. This is that. and so if you loved The Suicide Squad film, you're going to love this because it is the same tone. It's the same voice. It is frankly a direct sequel. I don't know if that's spoilery, but from the trailer, you can get that. It's a direct sequel to The Suicide Squad. Like you could have made this in live action and it would have been a sequel to that film. So it really just picks up where that film leaves off. And it's stylistically, it's that. And so everything that you liked about that movie is going to be here. If there's anything you didn't like about that movie, that's going to be here too. And overall, I like that movie and I really liked this. I think the animation is really good. Yeah. I love the character designs, especially Bride. I just think the Bride is the coolest looking character right now. I think they're all cool, but she really stood out to me. And maybe it's because I'm not as familiar with her comic book counterpart.
Same.
Yeah, so like honestly, I knew the DC version of Frankenstein, and I've seen him pop up a lot, but I don't know the DC version of the Bride. But she really stood out, and like you said, Indira Varma gives a great vocal performance, and the character design is terrific, and just the personality is there. So I think the action was really good. The animation is really strong. The humor, James Gunn humor can be divisive. I for me, it's very hit and miss, but for the most part, the humor in this worked for me. I got some good laughs in the first two episodes, and so that was a good thing. It
Yeah.
is very R-rated.
Yes,
Ve-
way more partial nudity than I expected in the show.
yeah. Like I
One thing I
expected the
didn't.
violence.
Yes.
Yeah, because again, I saw the trailer. I knew the violence was going to be there. And hey, you know what? They're monsters. It's
Yeah.
creature commandos, violence. It's cool. I'll roll with it. But yeah, it's the language, lots of F bombs, and then yeah, sex and nudity, lots of that too. And I'm not opposed to any of those things, but it's just a friendly word of warning that like it's not kind of R-rated. It's very R-rated, and so just be aware when you go in with your eyes wide open. So this is not something I watched with Harley. I did it after she went to bed, and then when I watched it, I was really glad she'd already gone to bed. So yeah, but again, I have my own little nitpicks. Again, this isn't spoilery. I think my biggest nitpick, and it's subjective, is like some of the songs James Gunn chose are weird to me. And we know that James Gunn loves his music, and a lot of times that really, really works, especially the Guardians films and everything.
Sure.
But the songs in here, I just thought were odd. I don't think they even fit with what was going on, and so yeah, they didn't work as well for me. But for the most part, it's entertaining. I like the characters, and yes, as a greedy fan, I wanted a little more of a window into the future of the DCU, and we don't get that yet. But hey, there are 5 more episodes, so who knows? But for now, Creature Commandos is a really fun and entertaining animated show, and when it was over, I was like, great, I wish I could watch the next one now, and that's always a good sign.
Yep. And maybe James Gunn is waiting to break from needle drops for Superman, because I hope Superman isn't laced with a bunch of needle drops. I don't necessarily see how that fits with Superman. There can be 1 or 2 in there. Maybe like Cat Stevens or something. I don't know, but there's something with Superman. But I think at this point, though, I think because James Gunn has earned it. I mean, the needle drops have worked so well and been so successful. And frankly, needle drops, shouldn't even phrase it that way, because it's more than that. He writes the songs into the scripts. So it's
Yeah.
part of the filming of his movies going back to Guardians of the Galaxy. And so for him to include those sorts of things, and of course bringing that into Peacemaker, but at the same time, it's a creative voice who has a kind of what's become a signature method. And the risk you run is it's not as effective every single time. Also, I agree with you. Not all the song choices land for me in the way that maybe they do, but some of that is also just my lack of familiarity with some of the songs that he dropped in here.
Well,
For
and that's just it. Is music is such a subjective thing. Is like
Correct.
it does, the same music doesn't work for everyone, and
Right.
so they have menus at restaurants. But it is definitely one of those things where it's like, maybe that song is perfectly appropriate for what's happening. I don't like that song, or what. So
Yeah.
I caught some flack because I didn't like the Hallelujah version in the Justice League trailer. And I was like, I'm sorry, I just don't like that song. It just, for me, it didn't work. And this could be the same thing where just subjectively, like these songs just didn't do it for me the way the Pina Colada song worked in Guardians 1,
Yeah. Well, and ultimately, I mean, these are minor. If I bump up against a song, it's a tiny little speed bump. It's no big
Exactly.
deal,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we move right back on. And I just kind of refocus on what I'm visually seeing on the screen, which was working very well. It's interesting when we think about James Gunn and his history, because what this also had me thinking of, just with the Creature Commandos, monstrous nature of it all, with the violence, the language, which was totally expected, and then the sex and nudity that maybe wasn't as expected. But it really kind of goes back to like the deepest roots of James Gunn, the earliest roots of him breaking into the industry through Trauma with Lloyd Kaufman and all of that. Like this is very much on par with stuff like that. So that's where I feel like James Gunn is kind of getting to reach back into something that he hasn't always had to be a part of for a long time, especially when you're making PG-13 films. So this is James Gunn really getting to cut loose. And then obviously it's not like Peacemaker was devoid of these things, or even the Suicide Squad. But he gets to be a little more extreme here in his niche Creature Commandos animated show, and he's taking full advantage.
Yeah, and I think that's it, is because it's an animated series on Max. Yeah, everybody is just very realistic of there aren't going to be the eyeballs on this the way there will be on Superman next summer. And so, yeah, he's allowed to take more risks, be naughtier, because it's Creature Commandos. Like you're not gonna piss too many people off by doing that. And he's been saying, actually, in all these interviews he's been doing over the past couple months, he keeps saying that he wants his DCU to be a large playground where there's room for all tones and all different, levels of storytelling. And so, you can, and I think he even said this, like, you can go hard R with something like Creature Commandos, and then you do something that's a lot more for everyone, like Superman. And I think he used those examples himself, and you definitely see that. So it's just more of like, when you go in, you just know it. And to your point, it's like, yes, there was some of it in the Suicide Squad. There was even more of it in Peacemaker, I would argue, because again, so it was an R-rated Max show, and then even more so here. So it's, and that's okay. Again, for me, none of it didn't work. It's just when some things happened, I was like, oh, we're doing this. Okay, all right, well, that's fine. I like animated boobies. That's fine.
Yep. Well, the great thing is you can't retroactively ruin anyone's childhood with Creature Commandos.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Risk free.
I agree with that. And well, let's get over the spoiler wall, because I don't know what people are going to count as spoilers, but just overall, I think you and I are on the same page. It is very good. It's really entertaining. Again, if you like James Gunn style, you're going to like this. It's very consistent with that. And I think the reason we both agreed that you would call this a soft introduction to the new DCU is what I already said, is this is a direct sequel to the Suicide Squad. And again, we kind of knew that from the trailer, but when it started, I was like, oh, they're not even being subtle about it. It's like, no, absolutely. Here's what happened in Court of Maltese. and so that's why we're doing this now. And you're like, oh, okay. So, it feels much more
the next Suicide Squad, but we don't get to call it that anymore.
Yes.
This is our loophole for having, don't call it Task Force X.
Right. And so it's like, here's what happened in the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, and then this is the next story. So this is almost, I would even say, like the third part of a trilogy between those three things, and then I guess very softly Ayer Suicide Squad. So it feels much more tied to the previous DCU than the new DCU. And again, that's going to be an interesting thing to see develop.
I think so. I think maybe the best way to characterize this right now is this is a bridge show, even more so than a launch. I think that's kind of what this feels like, is this is connecting us from what's happened before and part of what's being maybe kept or preserved, because James Gunn has been open about that. He's not just wiping the slate clean and saying whatever happened before I was running things at DC, not just making DC movies and shows, but actually running the whole studio with Peter Safran. He was never going to wipe all of that clean. So now it's trying to figure out what remains and what doesn't. Obviously, a lot of stuff that James Gunn's fingerprints are already on are going to remain. So that none of that is really surprising. I think what I will be curious about, because the first episode makes it abundantly clear what's being carried over, at least from some projects, the James Gunn projects and the previous iteration of the DCU. But in the new version, I do wonder if by the time we get to, if over the course of this series and by the time we get to episodes 6 or 7 to wrap up the season, will we start to see and hear more about what's happening in the future? It won't be a ton, and I won't expect that. But if it is going to be a bridge, part of that connection is, where we're going from here. So I wouldn't mind seeing a few teases of a few other things going on as the series continues, since it started out by letting us know what's still here.
I agree. And that was where I was getting a little greedy and hoping that would be the case. And maybe it will towards the end, is like, listen, I know it's not going to map out the DCU, but just a couple hints of like things to come would be really nice. And then I guess just one other point on the kind of continuity conversation is, this was a project that James Gunn pitched before he got the job as president of DC Studios. And so that also makes more sense, where if this was something he already had envisioned, it was something he already conceived, and then he got the gig and went, well, great, first thing I'm going to do is Creature Commandos, because I already have it. Right. I don't know if he had it written, but I've already got treatments. I already know what that's going to be. And so it would make more sense that if this was something that was in his mind before he even got the job, that it would be more connected to his previous two DC projects than whatever's coming in the future.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Anyway, let's get over the spoiler wall just in case. And so we like it. It's good. It's on Max. 2 episodes out right now. Next one will be, I think they come out on Thursdays. So yeah, something to enjoy through the Christmas season, because nothing says Christmas like Creature Commandos.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk spoilers. We're going to speak freely. So there you go. Your warning is in effect. We can speak freely in 3, 2, 1. First thing I'll mention before I forget is when I said that this is very much in line with the Suicide Squad, even just, what's the right word? I don't want to say the format, but almost the formula. The formula of the Suicide Squad you can definitely see reflected here, because the villain in this, at least for now, is Circe. And so much like he used Starro in the Suicide Squad of being like, hey, here's a cool DC villain that, like, you know, hasn't really been shown on the big screen and no one's really got any plans for. I can do Starro. I feel like the choice of Circe is very much along those lines of, like, Circe has been a mainstay, but she's never been an A-list DC villain. And him using her as the villain of this piece, you go, oh, I totally see where his head is at. And it gives them a powerful enough threat that they would need to put together this team of monsters as a whole new task force.
And it also gives them something that I would characterize as mainstream DC adjacent, in that the whole idea of Circe, the sons of Themyscira, and what do they want. This is not where the story is actually set, but it's a bunch of people who, you know, it's Circe building an army in Pokolistan that she can then go take over, use to take over Themyscira, because it's not fair that dudes don't have access to cool waterfalls, I guess. But
that was funny.
Yeah, it was. And so I think that's kind of what I like about it, though, is it's taking something that's more niche, more obscure in DC continuity, putting it up against something that is as mainstream as anything after the success, especially of the first Wonder Woman film, and obviously pushing, setting a lot of that in Themyscira. So there's a lot of much more, I'd say, mainstream general audience sensibility of what that is. And so having that be something that's part of this, but not quite, because again, we're not talking about a character in Circe who was showcased in some major way in that setting, but it's still close enough. It's a language, it's a location, it's a mythology that the audience has some awareness of, and I think that's a smart choice. Just because, yeah, this is going to be a bit more of a, it's going to be a smaller audience that this is aimed at, but just in case anybody's got some general DC awareness or fandom coming over from more mainstream properties, here's a little piece of that just kind of connects and shows this is all still part of that mythology. It's just a part of that mythology that most people had no idea was there.
Well, absolutely. And it also really does set the stage of the greater DCU, where it's like, yes, you know, we're focused on Task Force M, we're focused on Creature Commandos, but because of Circe, Themyscira is already out there. Like the greater DCU exists, and that's something else James Gunn's been very clear about, of like, no, it's not an origin story. You're not going to have to see everybody come into their own. It's a lived in world. And this just speaks to that. The actor playing Circe is Anya Chalotra. I don't know her, but just looking at her picture on IMDb, she could play Circe in live action. But I guess she's from The Witcher. But again, I thought that was a very cool choice. And as far as like hints to the greater DCU, that's the greatest we have right now, is the inclusion of her and the conversations of Themyscira. And then, yeah, her army of the Thuns of Themyscira was unexpected. I found it humorous. I do think it might ruffle some feathers, but they're feathers that probably deserve to be ruffled. But I was entertained by it.
Yeah, if you're offended by the Sons of Themyscira, you should really examine why.
Yeah, right. And something we didn't mention, but is worth noting also, is just the inclusion of Viola Davis as Amanda Waller. And so that was another thing, is, you know, obviously she was in both Suicide Squad films. In my opinion, she's just the perfect Amanda Waller. She's one of those actors that I am so glad is carrying over, because she's just too good to not keep. But the acknowledgement of what happened to her character in Peacemaker season 1. So again, like, not only for me, this show is again 90% a sequel to the Suicide Squad, but there's just that little mention of Peacemaker where even that counts too. And so it's nice to see her included. And man, that voice, like, just hearing that voice, like, I don't know if I want to say it makes me happy, but like, it makes me excited just because I just love her performance as Waller so much.
I mean, it just feels right, and
Yeah.
I think it's a incredibly smart, even if obvious choice for James Gunn to make. Although sometimes it's not so obvious because you feel like, well, if we're starting anew and launching a universe, we have to recast because we don't want connections to the previous thing. But this is not avoiding connections to previous things. So that's where it brings it and makes it obvious. You were lucky enough to inherit the perfect Amanda Waller. So just keep doing that because
Mhm.
Viola Davis is a legend and she is perfect in this spot. And her voice just it feels right at home for that character. And so yeah, even though Amanda Waller is, generally terrible in many situations, I still love hearing that voice.
Yeah, she's so good. Um, so we do get the intro with Amanda Waller and Rick Flag Sr., and they also acknowledge the death of Rick Flag Jr., which we know will also be addressed again in Peacemaker season 2. So again, all that is part of it, but then we do the introduction of this new creature commandos, of this new task force.
Mhm.
And it's very reminiscent of the Suicide Squad films where you get the name of the character and the little title card comes up. And I think that's a lot of fun. But I thought it was interesting that, like, yeah, they explained who they are, but they didn't go deeper. And I went, so are we just going to not know more about them? That was, again, this was my thought as it was
Right.
first going through. I was like, oh, is that all we're going to get? Because we just want to get to the adventure. And I'm okay with that, honestly. But then as we go and we get to episode 2, and episode 2 is very much focused on the backstory of the bride and even Frankenstein himself. We go, oh, okay, so they're going to be on this adventure out there in, what was the name of the country? I can't
I think
remember.
Pokolistan was
Yeah,
the name.
Pagolistan. To protect the princess because of Circe and the sons of Themyscira. So they're going to be out there doing this thing, and while they're doing this thing, then we as the audience will be clued into a little more information about each character, probably per episode or close to per episode.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, well that explains why in the beginning it's like, we'll introduce the characters, but stay tuned, you'll learn more.
Yeah,
But I
it's not an origin story. You're just going to get a dozen or a half dozen or so origin stories, buried within the main story of the episode or the series, which I think is smart. I like that approach. I think that we do want to know more about these characters. They're all introduced in a way in the first episode that gives us some curiosity to their backstory. Not curious of whether or not Weasel actually murdered 27 children or whatever that was. Do not care at all. Don't need an answer. But for the other ones, I do want to know a little bit more about where they came from. And obviously, the first episode ends in a way where we have to know what happened there between the bride and between Frankenstein. But the way they introduce the characters, I think works really well. I do think it helps that there's a rhythm, as you mentioned. It very much plays out like a Suicide Squad movie or the James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. The beats are very familiar.
Mhm.
Here's something that's going on. We have to stop it. We need Task Force X. Oh, we don't get to have that anymore. Well, here's the loophole that Amanda Waller wants to exploit. And they go through it in pretty short order, which I think was absolutely the way to do it. Because I think most of the people watching this show probably have seen the Suicide Squad and are kind of familiar with the beats of how this is supposed to work. So they move through it pretty quickly, and within the span of 5 minutes, we have the team and they're off and running to their mission.
Yeah.
So from a pacing standpoint, I thought that worked. I thought that worked really well, and it's okay to get to know characters as the story unfolds, as opposed to we have to have the long windup of here's how everyone got here, and you have to see that before they take off on their mission. So the way this was handled was smart because I also think if you spend too much time on everybody's origins up front, then that is also a formula that the audience is familiar with, and in many ways, I think in superhero media, desensitized to. So just find different ways to move through that and give the audience the info at a different pace. I think was a really smart choice, and it just allows the story to start at full speed, which I think was a great move.
I I agree. I didn't want it to be one of those things where, you got to set up every character and they don't get together until episode 6. Like that, that is a formula we have seen too. And I
Yeah,
find
no,
that
thank you.
far more frustrating than what we're getting here, which is no, you like you said, they're together in the first 5 minutes, off we go. And then we've got time as we go to flashback and learn more and flesh out those stories. Going in, not knowing that that was going to be the way it went down, I was kind of good either way. I like there's a certain amount of trust and purity of being like, this is who they are, roll with it, and I think that that can be fun too, but these are pretty obscure DC characters, and so to really garner that investment from the audience, I think this is smart. And I can be very hit and miss with flashbacks. I'll be honest. I can
Mm.
find them boring. I can find them inconsequential. That was always my complaint about the show Arrow. Is like I love what's happening in the present. Every time you flashback, I pick up my phone, and which was half the show.
Yeah.
And but here, at least so far, 2 episodes in, the flashback stuff with Frankenstein and the Bride in episode 2, I thought was great. I loved it. And listen, I'm a sucker for Universal Monsters. I'm a
Mm.
sucker for Frankenstein. I'm a sucker for the Bride of Frankenstein, just the concepts of them. And I loved that their story really leans into just that classic monster movie aesthetic and vibe. And then dovetailing that with like DC superheroes, for me, those are two tastes that go great together. So I really enjoyed that. And so for me, so far, so good. Like the flashback, I was like, no, this is just as interesting as what's happening now. And I'm good either way. And like you said, the character dynamics of Frankenstein and the Bride, and especially the characterization of Frankenstein, it was unexpected, but I'm interested. And I also think that it's probably setting up an interesting arc for Frankenstein himself.
I think so. Although it's tough because he's had hundreds of years already to learn, and he hasn't. So
I love that montage. We're in spoilers. That montage of them through the decades
oh, that
or
was
even
fantastic.
centuries of them constantly at odds was great.
Yeah, it just the only thing it does for me is it's that's potentially detrimental to the story. We'll see how it plays out, but I'm like, he hasn't learned a lesson in a couple hundred years, but he's going to learn his lesson and complete his arc and not be so problematic in the short span of the present day story here. Although it doesn't seem like they've ever really had a conversation, so maybe that conversation happens and that's a turning point for Frankenstein, or maybe he's learned more and just hasn't been able to show it because he's gotten his ass kicked every time he's located the bride. I'm not really sure. But anyway, I really enjoyed that montage. I think in general, besides that, you mentioned the animation earlier. I think the action in the series has been really great. I loved the Rick Flag Sr. and Phosphorus fight in the first
Mm,
episode.
hmm
Yes, if you were wondering out there, like how could he possibly be fighting this nuclear fire guy in a t-shirt and boxers and not even wearing gloves until he finally finds an oven mitt? You're totally right, and I was even asking myself that same question as the fight was happening. I was like, I don't really buy this, but it still looks cool as hell, and I'm having fun with it anyway. And then when we got to a bit of the bride and Cersei fight in the second episode, I thought that looked really great. And then just, classic James Gunn of here we have this intense action sequence that's in the midst of a very intense episode that gives us some intense backstory in the middle of the action sequence. Oh, and then I'm going to turn the bride's arms, or Cersei's going to turn the bride's arms into wacky, wavy, inflatable, arm flailing tube men. Just all of it goes into for Creature Commandos, and all of it should go into the pot for Creature Commandos. But overall, the action in the series, I think, has been a genuine highlight and a really entertaining part of the show. Which, I mean, it's action; it should be, but that doesn't make it easy to do.
No, I agree. I enjoyed the Flag Phosphorus fight, but for me, it was Circe and the Bride that really just I was like, okay, this is just great. Um, and I loved the Bride felt very outmatched, but just to watch her hold her own and really get get
Yeah.
the upper hand on a couple occasions of Cersei was great. And I appreciated that in the middle of that fight, Cersei started casting spells, and she even said, she's like, oh, magic.
Yep.
She's so frustrated. That made me laugh. So yeah, that fight for me so far from an action standpoint has been the highlight. It was really an excellent fight. And
Well, and of course, the bride, who was born of totally legitimate science, would of course be offended by magic. And
right. Oh yeah. And then the bride goes on this side quest in episode 2 where she goes back to kind of her castle home. She wants to get this necklace that Victor Frankenstein had given to her once upon a time, and she is followed by Nina. And Nina, I think she so far is really feels like the heart of the team.
Yes.
She's very ape sapien.
Mhm.
In a good way, but like, she's more of a pacifist, really smart, but I really enjoyed her character. She's not as showy, she's not as badass, but she's very sweet. And I think they even introduced her, Amanda Waller's like, listen, don't discount her. She might be your best ally. So I
Yeah.
really enjoyed her a lot too. And then yeah, she gets roped into this fight between the bride and Cersei, and in the end of episode 2, when she's like, what I think she
Yes.
says, go F yourself, maybe something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her character too, and I'm excited to see more with her.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed the "go f yourself" moment because it was, I mean, it was legitimately funny, and I laughed out loud at it, not just like typed the letters, but like actually laughed out loud at it. But I think what was also great about it is that we've been introduced to Nina Mazursky, who's been so nice and so sweet. And so it's almost the moment where you would kind of expect that character to still be nice and sweet, to be like, no, she's now legitimately bothered by being roped into this with the bride. And the bride kind of apologizing for it is just kind of goofy and nonsense anyway. So she doesn't have to accept it. I mean, this is not going to draw some line between them that Nina's not going to be able to get over. But it was a moment where, yeah, the bride has kind of earned that "go f yourself" from Nina, so that's what she gives to her, and I like it because I think that's what changed it up a little bit from what felt very familiar, and it was the classic pairing of when you have a team and you pair a couple of the characters, to pair the most cynical, emotionally hardened character, as the bride appears to be, with the sweetest and perhaps most naive character. That's kind of the way that always goes. And it
Mm-hmm.
went through some of those paces in the second episode. How do you kind of change that up? You show, well, Nina's nice and sweet, but she'll still speak up for herself when she's angry, and she can get angry. And then I do look forward to that moment, as you mentioned, teasing that she may be the most valuable member of the bunch. I way too early to have that payoff in episode 2, but towards the end of the season, or if not, maybe we'll get it earlier in the middle of the season, but we're gonna see that moment, and I'm very much looking forward to it because I think Nina Mazursky is a really cool character right now.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like the character dynamics are really good and the personalities are varied, and you need someone like a Nina to really help ground things with, stuff like Weasel and some of the more outrageous ones. And
It
so,
helps to have someone who actually kind of cares about things and cares about
right.
other people on the team.
Yeah. So no, I really enjoyed that a lot. Alan Tudyk, you mentioned, is Phosphorus. He's also credited as Clayface, who we have not met yet, but we know that's coming. I was glad that his Phosphorus voice was not his Clayface voice
Yes.
from Harley Quinn. I love his Clayface voice from Harley Quinn, but now we just know it so well that
Yeah.
it would have been distracting. Um, but it's always good to see his name pop up, and
Yes.
I think that yeah, he was very entertaining as Phosphorus. Some of the gags about, like, I'm not smiling, I'm a skull. Actually, I am
Mhm.
smiling, but you shouldn't know that. Something
Right.
like that. Like he's a fun, cynical, sarcastic character, and I really enjoyed him. And even Rick Flag Sr., I think, is really good in this. And after he and Phosphorus have that fight, and he wins, and they think that he's going to sell them out, he's like, "You guys remember, we're all on the same team. Like I'm not here to hurt you."
Right.
Um, I thought, yeah, I mean, he's very similar to his son, I guess, is that, I think Rick Flag Jr. was a little bit of a thankless role in the two Suicide Squad films. And I think that's why I liked him so much, is I think in the end, I was like, but he's just trying to do the right thing. And I
Right.
think that he definitely gets that from his father here. So Rick Flag Sr. is also a nice kind of grounding presence at the center of the team.
I think he is, and I think that that's a really key moment. And Phosphorus kind of pays it back when he tries to cover for Rick Flag when he's hooking up with Ilana. So that
Mhm.
part, so we see that like where Phosphorus it kind of changes. It meant something to Phosphorus that Rick Flag didn't just immediately hit the button or try to turn him in or any of those
Yeah.
sorts of things. And I think it's great. It's kind of a way of just acknowledging the elephant in the room of there's a dynamic of these people are forced to be on this mission with Rick Flag Sr. So why would they have any reason to care about him? Why would they have any reason to care about each other? There has to be these little bonding moments. And so for Phosphorus to do the obvious thing, which is try to grab that remote the first chance he gets, I will. And speaking of things I don't buy Rick Flag Sr. knowing that who these characters are, leaves it in a bag far away from him while he's sleeping. So I don't buy that, but we needed a setup to have the fight. So I'll go ahead and I'll take it. But to have the obvious thing happen with one of the characters try to grab the remote and get into a confrontation with Flag and use that as kind of the launch point of here's where these characters can start bonding with one another and building some trust to show these characters, yeah, most of them have been alone, but they don't really want to be. They have been by the nature of who they are, and they're not even seen as human. So I like that as giving it some genuine emotional grounding. And speaking of, I mean, even when they find silly ways to do it or action packed ways to do it, it's still legitimately emotionally grounding in my book. And speaking of the emotional grounding with Rick Flag Sr., I love the scenes where he talks about his son. The
Yeah.
scene
Yeah.
where he explains to Alana who he was, and then, of course, how he felt his son was even kind of different from him, maybe better than him, and speaking with the really talking about it like genuinely a father who's lost his son. And I think that's always been one of the things that I've always liked most about James Gunn as a storyteller is as someone who can be so extreme and so silly, so irreverent, and all of these things that James Gunn is so well known for. I think it's not like some huge revelation. I think people are well aware of this by now, but it's the way he finds the genuine emotional moments, the space for these genuine emotional moments, even against these crazy comic booky backdrops and these characters. The way he can kind of pump the brakes on that, or just right alongside that in complete alignment with it without really disrupting anything and have it magically woven into the story of genuine emotional experiences and expressions from the characters. That's always been, I think, as much of the magic of James Gunn as a storyteller as anything else. And that's what I was absolutely feeling when Rick Flag Sr. was talking about Junior.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That was a great scene and a great moment. And I think that Frank Grillo really gives a good performance. And so I'm excited to see more of him, not just in this show, but then where he pops up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you mentioned GI Robot, and like you said, we're going to get more of him. I think episode 3, but he also is really entertaining and just his complete obsession with killing Nazis.
Yeah,
That's all. It's all he talks about. So many stories he
identifying and killing
tells.
Nazis. And then,
Yeah,
is that a Nazi? It's just I love GI Robot. I even though I'm a huge fan of the Bride, Rick Flag Sr., Nina Mazursky, big fan of the characters that have been showcased more prominently through the first 2 episodes. But GI Robot, I feel like there's just this sneaking suspicion I have, and maybe the takeover happens in episode 3 based on the preview. GI Robot feels like a prime candidate to become my favorite character in this show. Not that there's like some huge honor in being Sean's favorite character in Creature Commandos, but I think I am really excited about GI Robot and learning more about that character, which is not something I would have expected to say going into the watching this show for the first time, because it's not a character I'm overly familiar with from DC Comics. But what I've been presented with so far has me really entertained and really curious about this character.
yeah. And again, I think that's what James Gunn does so well is taking these very different characters and an incredibly eclectic group of people and throwing them together. And I think that he's done it again here with these characters. My nerdy complaint is I wish there was a werewolf in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to be with at least with the Creature Commandos that I was familiar with in the past. I don't know if Weasel took that spot, so another reason to be bitter at Weasel, but I
Yep.
would have loved that. But it's interesting because I want to see how Frankenstein, because right now he is an outsider. He is not part of this team, and he's
Right.
going to be pulled in because of his pursuing the bride. And it'll be interesting to see how and when he becomes actually part of the team, or if he does. I would assume he's going to have to, just based on the artwork and the poster and everything. I'm like, I feel like at a certain point he's got to fight alongside them. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because
I mean,
like I
because
said,
right now he's acting a lot more like a son of Themyscira. So,
yeah.
that turning point for him is going to be interesting.
Yeah. But I've always liked the DC version of Frankenstein. I think it's a great design. I think he looks awesome. Like, it's a great just combination of what you would expect from Frankenstein, and then giving it just enough of that DC superhero twist to make it fit into this world. So I want to like him more, but like you said, right now, from what we've seen in the one episode, we don't love him yet. I I hope that he finds redemption.
I hope so too, and I do believe that he will.
I think so too. I think
We are
it's
not
got to go
meant
that way.
to dislike David Harbour.
Exactly. No one can. So yeah, that'll be cool to see.
I mean, I would also highlight Peter Serafinowicz's performance as Victor
Oh
in
yeah.
episode 2, and I'm glad that he popped up in here. Obviously, was part Denarian Saul and James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy. So great to see. I mean, and he's of course been frequently in other James Gunn projects and things, but also The Tick briefly in live action. So great to hear his voice in this series, and as well as the character of Victor von Frankenstein. Although, and speaking of problematic characters, Victor is too. So,
Mm-hmm.
the dynamic between him and the bride didn't necessarily lend itself to what he allowed that relationship to become. So I think I wouldn't say I certainly wouldn't say he necessarily deserved what happened to him at the end there, and that was rough, especially for the bride. But nevertheless, character complications aside, the performance by Peter Serafinowicz was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was like nicely unexpected too, of just getting really what Victor Frankenstein is in this universe as well, and how he fits in, and like you said, how he comes to that tragic end. But I'll tell you, Frankenstein, I don't know how you thought doing that was going to make the bride choose you.
Well, everything about Frankenstein is misguided.
Right.
The assumption that a woman is born and therefore she is made for me and is meant to love me, and that's automatically going to happen. That's a goofy assumption. But he's Frankenstein. He didn't, he was also born on a table with a lightning bolt, so can't totally blame him for not understanding the way things work.
Right. He don't have what they call the social skills.
Not at all.
All right. Well, I mean, again, 2 episodes in, really, really enjoying it and looking forward to more. So, again, it feels more to me feels more like a remainder of the previous DCU than a path forward to the future DCU. But maybe, like you said, as a bridge series, that transition will happen over the course of all 7 episodes. But it's nice to get this extra DC content from a year where there hasn't been a ton. Like.
Right.
Joker 2 went down in flames. The Penguin, but otherwise, it's been pretty quiet as far as new DC content this year, and I think that at least we end on a somewhat strong note with Creature Commandos, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, so far, I mean, 2 episodes in, we've still got, I think, a handful more to go, but it's as good of a start as I could hope for, and I think if I'm gonna highlight a remaining challenge for the series, I think it is just, while I want to, and I'm looking forward to getting some of the backstories of these characters, I just don't want every episode week to week to kind of feel. I hope James Gunn, and I believe he has, because he's usually pretty good about that. But hopefully, finding ways to not have change speeds and change up the pace of the remaining episodes, because that can also start to feel formulaic if it's the same. If it's a very similar rhythm each week of here's the backstory of X character in the midst of their key plot moment in the overall story. I mean, that's pretty much what's going to happen, but it's the how that's going to happen that I think is going to be interesting in terms of keeping our attention and allowing us to be just as excited and entertained by the remaining episodes as it sounds like we both were for the first 2.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Is like it does run the risk of it just being the same formula of like, oh, well, this is GI Robots episode up, and this is going to be Phosphorus's episode, and like mixing it up enough where it doesn't start to feel too samey.
Right.
All right, well, great. Any final thoughts on Creature Commandos episodes 1 and 2?
Just that I think they're off to a really great start, and I'm happy with it. I mean, I think that I what I didn't want to see happen, and I know that there were never going to be as many eyeballs on this show. If it came out and it was a miserable failure, no one would know except us, and
Yeah.
a relatively smaller segment of DC and superhero fandom. So it wouldn't. It's not like it would not have been the end of the DCU before it got started or right as it got started if this show was a flop. But nevertheless, I've been very excited about James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over the DCU and DC Studios and all of that from the jump. And people can go back and listen to the archives of Holy BatCast for the explanation as to why I was so excited about that. And I wanted to see this get off to a good start. I really did. And I know that even when there aren't as many eyes on it, I just want the quality of the storytelling to be there and be present. And what I've come to know and appreciate about James Gunn and the vision that he brings to things and his sensibilities, which go far beyond the arguably more superficial things that he's known for. They're kind of the signature. To me, it is the heart. It's the sincerity within the storytelling and finding the spaces for that sincerity that is also part of the signature of James Gunn. And so that is very much present here in Creature Commandos. And it gets me very excited about where things go from here for the DCU and gives me yet another reason to just be even a little bit more excited about Superman, which apparently there's still space for me to be even more excited about it. But which is weird. Like Creature Commandos makes you more excited for Superman, but it does because of who's in charge, and that guy being in charge has done so far what looks like another great thing.
Yeah, agreed. And you're right about Creature Commandos just being low risk, high reward of being this first project, because there's just not going to be as many eyeballs on it. So if people don't like it, again, it's not going to matter to most people. But if people do like it, and I have seen strong responses and strong reviews, I haven't dug too deep, to be completely honest. It's not like I've gone and read every review, but the ones I did see, I've seen pop up, have all been very strong. It at least starts garnering the goodwill of this new regime. And like you said, this new voice in James Gunn. And I do think that, at least from episodes 1 and 2, this is a very good new DC project that's really entertaining and action packed and very grown up, but lots of fun too. And there's, and I hope that it finds its audience. It'll be interesting to see how that conversation goes as far as like, how many people are watching it and how it's doing. We don't know, but at least so far, it seems like the people who are watching it are liking it, and that includes you and me. I thought it was. I thoroughly enjoyed episodes 1 and 2. Even if, like you said, it's not like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. It's not the best thing ever. It's a really good, fun animated DC show about some really random DC characters that maybe you know nothing about, or maybe you only have a passing knowledge of. But after 2 episodes, you're like, I want to watch more of them, and that means the show did its job.
Being really good, fun, and sincere is a worthwhile endeavor in a superhero story. And so it doesn't have to be the best thing ever to be great. It can be great in its own way.
No, Sean. This is the internet. This is the internet. It has to be the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. Those are your options.
I know that's how it works on the internet. I'm not the internet. I just live there sometimes. So being a really good superhero story is also worthwhile, and so I appreciate Creature Commandos for being exactly that so far.
And one quick other note before we move on is, we mentioned that Alan Tudyk is Dr. Phosphorus, but he will also at some point pop up as Clayface. And so that's going to be our Batman connection here. So maybe he'll just be Clayface and there will be no other mention of his world back in Gotham, but we can hope. So at least they're seeding elements of the Batman world, since we know Clayface is going to pop up in one way or another.
Yes.
So I'll take what I can get right now, especially since it's Creature Commandos. Any little bit of something else that alludes to the greater DCU, is a bonus.
Well, because the world refuses to put Clayface in a movie like they should, then I will continue to take what I can get in animated form.
Well, let me say this. I feel like the casting of Alan Tudyk and making sure that Clayface pops up in Creature Commandos, I think bodes well for his big screen prospects, at least in the DCU.
I love that confidence, and I just won't. I'm not getting my hopes up yet, but that would be great if it worked out that way.
I just feel like James Gunn's the kind of guy who would be like, of course Clayface should be in a movie.
Yeah, you're definitely not wrong about that.
Cool. All right, Creature Commandos. It's available to all of you on Max, episodes 1 and 2, and then episode 3 coming later this week on Thursday. It's a good time, and we hope you guys enjoy it as much as we did. But I do want to check in with you guys. I want to see what you're up to. So let's see what you fine feathered finks have to say, and we'll open up the Wayne Manor mailbox. It's time again for the Wayne Manor mailbox.
You've got mail.
What is a letter for me?
Maybe temporary.
She wrote a letter. You're one hell of a messenger.
This is all Master Wayne.
All right, first email here is from Mark Bickford. It says, hey guys, I realize I just sent an email, but I was listening to your last Caped Crusader episode, and there were a couple things mentioned that I could fill in. First, onomatopoeia wasn't strictly speaking used in the Arrowverse, as far as I know, but he was a main villain in season 3 of Superman and Lois. One thing I noticed in both that series and Caped Crusader is that no creator credit for the character, which surprised me. The other thing mentioned was the Easter egg at the corner of Wheeler and Nicholson. Sorry, Jack, but I believe that's actually calling out Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, the founder of what became DC. He has a living granddaughter, June Wheeler Nicholson, who's an actress. I don't know if she's ever been asked to be in a DC movie or if there's resentment because the Major was effectively pushed out of his own company, but so far as I know, she's never been in a DC film. I hope James Gunn will correct that, assuming she wants to be in one. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. And so, first point, I watched every episode of Superman and Lois. I don't remember onomatopoeia showing up. So, my bad. Maybe that one just I just forgot about. So, interesting. I don't know. Did you watch Superman and Lois, Sean?
I have not seen Superman and Lois, no.
Well, I don't want to give anything away for a future episode, but bro, the last season was just amazing.
That's what I've heard. So I may be finally convinced to give the show a shot. I've consistently heard great things about it. I think it's just my own having moved on from some of the DC CW era, but it feels like Superman and Lois is worth at least checking out. And I know it's all on Max, so I really don't have an excuse. So I'm gonna have to get into it.
I mean, it's only 4 seasons, so relatively speaking, it's a low commitment. And honestly, the whole show was very good. But yeah, this final season really blew me away, and hopefully I will talk about that soon in a future episode. And then as for the Easter egg about the corner of Wheeler and Nicholson, I did not know that. So you're right. I completely missed on me. Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson is a name I did not know, Mark. So good on you. You schooled me. Sean, I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that either. So I appreciate the education as far as whether or not, and was it the granddaughter that was mentioned of the cameo? I don't know that those sorts of things really kind of remedy anything, but I will say if there's a possibility of that happening, again, as there was an assumption made there that she would be interested in a cameo. Don't know, we have no idea about that, but if she wanted to, that doesn't sound like something that would be all that crazy especially for James Gunn to do. And I think that we have seen, obviously there's a complex history and not always positive history in the relationships between publishers and creators of characters and credit and all of those sorts of things. But we have seen some of those bridges being rebuilt between some of these companies and creators of characters over the past decade or so. And so this could be something else that could maybe fall in line with that. But it's not necessarily something I feel anyone has to do. But if there's an interest there on her side and an interest from DC, then yeah, that could also be fun. Although, again, a cameo like that, it's not necessarily a recognizable cameo in the sense that anyone watching the movie is going to know who that is besides, this person and the people who know her. But if they want to do that as a fun thing and she's up for it, that would be great.
Yeah. All right, next email here is from Tom Fallows. It says, "Hey, hope you're doing well. On your last episode, someone brought up thoughts on non-comic book readers and the assumptions they have for Batman that get on your nerves. One that's always annoyed me is that Robin makes everything campy. I've heard it for years from friends, and I always say that Robin doesn't make things campy, the creator does. People tend to forget that Robin's story in Batman Forever was the darker aspect of the movie. The campy parts were the villains, and to be fair, looking at those movies, Chris O'Donnell played the Robin character quite straight, and he didn't camp it up nearly as much as the villains. So I've never got why Robin always gets flack. Maybe it's a holdover from the 60s version, but Batman was camp in that as well. Anyway, what do you think? Also, I have to mention, this is more for movie makers. Stop using The Dark Knight Returns and Year One as your reference for the movies. Whenever a movie maker talks about Batman, they immediately go to those. Nolan did it, Snyder really did it, and now Reeves has done it. I get those books are important, but there's 80 plus years of stories. We don't need to see those anymore. I do know they've used other stories like The Long Halloween and Nightfall, etc., but it seems like those two stories are the ones that have become the blueprint for Batman, and I'm kind of bored of them. Sorry, Jamie. Anyway, those are my rants. I'm gonna head to BetterHelp to discuss this more. Have a great podcast, Tom. All right, thanks, Tom. I appreciate the message. And we'll talk about the first one first, about Robin making things campy. I'll just say I am with you 100% as far as, the Batman fans who were like, Robin doesn't work. We don't want Robin. We don't like Robin. Robin makes things silly. Robin makes things for kids. I completely disagree. I think that there are so many great, valid Robin stories to tell. And I think that Robin serves a very important role in Batman's life and Batman's journey and Batman's worldview that, yeah, I think it is unfair when people just dismiss Robin so flippantly. It does annoy me. I mean, you've listened to the show. You know that. I'm a huge Robin fan. And I think that dismissing him because, Robin just doesn't work in live action or whatever, it bugs me because you have a little more imagination and creativity. And I think that Robin absolutely can work in live action. And to your point, especially when I was talking about Batman Forever, like the Robin story might be the least ridiculous part of that movie. So yeah, anyway, I agree. What do you think, Sean?
I like Tom, and all of that's very well argued. Robin has the darkest and most earnest kind of story and just presentation portrayal in that movie. He's the least goofy character in Batman Forever.
Yeah.
And the least campy character. Even Batman is campier than Robin in Batman Forever. So there's that argument is very well made. And yeah, I think a lot of the assumptions about Robin carry over from the 60s. The Adam, of course, Burt Ward's portrayal, which was great for what it was in its time. So I'm not going to take anything away from that. But I think that is an idea of Robin that's just kind of carried forward. And then as these things work hand in hand, when Tom brings up Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One as such common reference, and it goes beyond that. It goes beyond those being the common references for movies. Those were common references that were major influences on how Batman comics have been written in the decades since those stories came out, especially The Dark Knight Returns. And The Dark Knight Returns, obviously, it still acknowledges Robin, but it's not necessarily, the best overall, well, Carrie Kelly, but there's not necessarily the best overall feelings towards Robin coming from that. And then obviously Year One, a story where Robin isn't on the scene yet. And so when you have those types of appearances, I think that's part of it. That's part and parcel with why Robin has been characterized this way of, Batman is so much better on his own. And Robin is the one who kind of holds Batman back. And it's also just the general idea of Batman is just so dark of a character. There's just no way that he could ever partner with a kid. And there's just no way that would happen. And so that is inherently campy. And it's unrealistic. And Batman is, as we all know, the most realistic of all the superheroes. And we can't have anything that flies in the face of that, including a bird boy. So I feel like a lot of those assumptions about Batman, it's tough. It makes it tough for Robin. It's created that uphill battle for that character to go back into live action. And unfortunately, Robin also just, it doesn't make sense if you actually see the movies, but the Schumacher era that killed one iteration of the Batman franchise, a lot of that gets tossed back on Robin when Robin was the least offensive of
Yeah.
anybody who's in any of those movies, even not just Batman Forever, but even Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Robin has been scapegoated for a lot of these things and a lot of failures of Batman in mainstream media. It's not fair. It's not correct. And the whole idea that you can't make Robin work in some grounded sort of way, because we're all about grounding Batman. So it's nonsense to me. I mean, we could do an entire series of podcasts about this topic and how wrong so many of these assumptions are. And I would take it a step further. It's not just, and again, I don't think it's non-comic book readers. There are plenty of people who read Batman comic books and don't like Robin and don't think Robin works and want to find every comic they can get their hands on that don't have Robin in it. I don't think it's necessarily a line between comic book readers and non-comic book readers. It's how you feel about Robin. But I feel like there are so many ways in which the character could be done. And I also feel like from a mainstream general audience sort of perspective, which I'm not one of them when it comes to Batman stories, obviously, and Robin stories, of course. But I don't think it's going to would be all that difficult to get mainstream buy-in for a character like Robin and fighting alongside Batman. Thankfully, James Gunn is bringing that to us in the DCU in some form. Even if it's Damian, it's still Batman and a Robin, so I'll take it, and hopefully some more Robin history being incorporated into it. But it's really not that difficult, and I actually think there is a genuine desire for the audience to actually see it. And even if it's not something they're aware that they really want, it's something they would have an absolute ton of fun with if they had Batman and Robin in a much better movie than the ones they were previously treated to.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. And then just to piggyback on the conversation around The Dark Knight Returns in year one, I also agree with those points too, is those are great landmark stories, and not to take anything away from them, but here's the thing. I feel like the best version of year one we got was with Christopher Nolan and Batman Begins. And I feel like Zack Snyder did a great version of The Dark Knight Returns and Batman v Superman. So I feel like both of those have had their time. Yep. We've gotten great versions in previous films. It is time to open up our scope a little bit more and to explore something a little bit broader and a little different, to give us some different flavors and some different takes on these characters.
And one last thing to try to put a little bit of a button on The Dark Knight Returns. That is a story that is critical of Batman. Like, Batman's not supposed to be this way. That is a future that Batman was supposed to avoid. It wasn't really meant to be the status quo of Batman's mindset for decades in the comic books. And it's not to accuse every single comic book that Batman's been in of being derivative of that. A lot of writers have done a great job of kind of breaking free of some of that mindset and that mold for Batman. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say every Batman story has been that version of Batman for the past, now coming up on almost 40 years. Yikes. So I think that we've seen some of that versatility in the comic books, and we just need to see more of that in live action, because that is what I think makes Batman such a great character, and why he's endured is how versatile that character is, and how you can shift tones and types of stories, scale of stories, how fantastical it is, how gritty and grounded it is. Batman works in a wide variety of settings. That's part of what makes the character so unique and so special. Why not showcase that on the biggest stage, which is when Batman pops up in movies?
Absolutely. And to even take a step back along that same line of thought is that's true for Robin. Like, there's the versatility of Batman as a character, Batman alone and Batman with Robin. But guess what? We've gotten lots and lots and lots of Batman stories in movies, sans Robin. So for all of the Batman fans who say, I like him without a Robin, y'all have been served. You've got what you need. You've been eating good for over 25 years now. And now it's time to give us a little bit of the other and bring Robin back into the fold.
Yeah, you've got a shelf full of Blu-rays of just Batman. Just, let us have Robin for a little while.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to a more recent email because I know you've got thoughts, Sean. So as long as you're here.
Oh, all right.
It's about Green Lantern.
Ooh, yeah, please.
This is from Carrie Vanderberg. It says, hey, Andy and Bat Crew. He says, I wanted to ask about Green Lantern. Since you guys recently talked about how Green Lantern is one of your favorites in the DC Pantheon, I have some Green Lantern questions. Hal Jordan and John Stewart are cool characters, and I like the premise of the Green Lantern Corps. In comics, I've read the Sinestro Corps War arc, but I still can't wrap my head around how constructs work. Are they physical matter? What's the difference between the constructs as objects versus them using the ring as a laser blaster? Should a member of the Green Lantern Corps be able to hold their own against an extremely powerful character like Black Adam or Superman? In Zack Snyder's Justice League, Steppenwolf says that the Earth has no protectors, no lanterns, no Kryptonian. So if Steppenwolf and Darkseid see the GL Corps as a legit threat, could Hal or John be an actual challenge to Superman? Do you think that Zack Snyder would have heightened GL's power level? Feel free to recommend any Green Lantern comic runs. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving and happy to hear that Andy Jr. is healthy and doing well. Thanks as always for a great show, Carrie. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, I thought this was going to be about the Lanterns show, but it's okay. It all goes hand in hand because I also know that Sean is an even bigger Green Lantern fan than I, and I love Green Lantern. So I wanted to jump to this. So I don't know if you have like the internal logic of constructs, but I will say I have always believed that a Green Lantern could go toe to toe with like a Superman. In my opinion, I always felt he could. But I don't know. Maybe that's my bias just because I like Green Lantern. But what do you think, Sean?
Toe to toe with Superman is tough. I put it this way: in the imaginary world of superheroes, where we also pretend that Batman can hold his own against Superman for more than a millisecond, yes, a Green Lantern can go toe to toe with Superman and do much better against Superman. Stands a much better chance against Superman. Would make it a longer and more interesting fight than Batman ever could, even with all of his, all of his wits and all of his toys. But yeah, as far as constructs go, they are basically, I can't remember what there's a technical pseudoscientific comic book term for it, but it basically can become like hard light. So yes, it can physically strike someone with a construct, and the things that you see you go back to, for those who remember, Green Lantern in 2011 when he makes the little Gatling gun with it. Yeah, you can do that. You can make a gun that fires bullets with a construct. It's not just a laser beam or anything like that. Like, it can do the thing. Whatever you are constructing, it can have the same effect of whatever object it is you are constructing. You're building with your ring, whether you're using your will because you're a Green Lantern, or you're using the power of fear because you're part of the Sinestro Corps. So that's, I mean, the internal mechanics of how it works is you can basically make anything you can imagine, and it has the ability to do what it would if it was the real object that you were making. You can also make something that doesn't exist, if you can imagine it, and it can have the function that you want it to have. So lanterns in general, regardless of which core they are a part of, they are incredibly powerful. And yes, they can certainly hold their own against a lot of other metahumans in the DCU. And yes, be a tough challenge for Superman, even though Superman ultimately trumps most of them. So yeah, lanterns are awesome. Their stories are incredible. I think if there's one, I know it's the most obvious recommendation, and it can become, a bit of an eye roll, especially people who have read a lot of Green Lantern prior to this. But as far as I'm concerned, the Jeff Johns run on Green Lantern is as good as any run with an individual creator has had on a book on a mythology. And so, I mean, that the only other one that rivals it for me, and this is totally subjective, but I grew up on Peter David's Incredible Hulk run for Marvel. And that was something that as a kid really introduced me into a character. Well, I already knew who Hulk was from animation, but really dove deep into a mythology and a psychology of a character in a world. And that was hugely impactful for me as a sustained run of one creator on a book, for that. And then I found that again with Jeff Johns and Green Lantern. And I was a little bit late to the party. It was recommended to me, like, make sure you check out this Jeff Johns run on Green Lantern. It's incredible. So you start through Rebirth and you go all the way through. You mentioned Sinestro Corps War. You go all through Blackest Night, which was a huge DC crossover event that was Green Lantern based, which was unique for that to even be something that would happen. And then it continues on through War of the Green Lanterns, which I also thought was great and very underrated. But the Jeff Johns run of Green Lantern really encapsulates. And it was also a huge boom to the Green Lantern mythology. That's where all these other cores come from. There was only one core. It was only the GL core until the Jeff Johns run, when he actually introduced the entire, emotional spectrum of the different core, from fear and hope and love and rage. Greed, of course, was another one. Larfleeze is awesome. So there's a lot of great mythology that's in there. It is superhero Star Wars. It's phenomenal. And it is absolutely what I dreamt we were starting on the path towards with the first Green Lantern movie. That sadly went the way that it went. And that is still the Green Lantern that I want to see. And that is the mythology that I want to see showcased. And I just think you are printing money if you do it even half right. And I really hope that they find a way to graduate to that from a more terrestrial Lanterns Max series.
All right, I want to talk about that in just a second, but real quick, thank you for your insights on Green Lantern. As far as the constructs go, here was always my understanding, because I thought that the rule was the ring can create anything you can imagine.
Yep.
Right? 9 times out of 10, that's usually a physical construct, a giant fist, a jet plane, a tank, whatever. But you also can imagine a green laser beam, so I think it can be both, right?
True. Yes.
So that's the way I always took it. So, and I was always just happy with that in my head canon.
Yeah.
But you did mention the Lantern series, and again, that's what I thought the email was in regards to. But as long as I've got you here, I know we've chatted a little bit off the mic, but I wanted to address the recent comments that James Gunn made about the Lantern series, because you already alluded to them, because he was on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, and he was asked about Green Lantern, and they asked him about how grounded would it be, because that damn word grounded, which has become a trigger word for me. And he said, well, and I guess they asked him, does that mean they're not going to have costumes or anything? And he says, well, I don't want to give all that away. I think grounded, just like if Green Lanterns were real, what the F would they be and how would they be? I was thinking about it the other morning. The thing that keeps getting out is that it's a terrestrial story. And I'm like, yeah, because it's on Earth. The story takes place on Earth. And people are like, well, we don't want to see Earth. They're from outer space. They fly with rings. And I'm like, yeah, they're on Earth for the story, like most Green Lantern stories. He said they're terrestrial bound. It's not in outer space. We don't have 1,000 Green Lanterns or any of that. It's a grounded story that's being told through another lens in a way that's really, it's an HBO series, and it's going to be an HBO series, and I'm happy with that, and I love the scripts. So I read this, and for me, I got a little bit of whiplash, because I'm like, he's like kind of saying both. He's saying, oh, it's not going to be that grounded, but at the same time, it's also not going to be in outer space with 1,000 Green Lanterns, but I also don't want to give stuff away. And so I was like, okay, he's trying to answer the question without answering the question, other than it's set on Earth. But he's not saying, well, it's not a Green Lantern series. But so I read this and I was like, well, it's just a little confusing and a little frustrated. So I continue to wait and see. But I know that, you've had concerns about these descriptors for the series of being grounded, being earthbound. So I wanted to get your take on these latest comments.
They don't do anything to ease any of my concerns and worries about this series. They just don't. And this is the one thing, which is, it's crazy to be so excited about James Gunn and everything he brings to the DCU, everything he's bringing to DC Studios, but for this one thing. And I guess it stings that much more because this one thing is above all the thing I would want to be done right in. I mean, I'm excited about James Gunn's Superman. I am, but my next favorite mythology after Batman in DC Comics is Green Lantern. And so that's the one that I was really hoping James Gunn would find some, because I didn't anticipate he would write or direct it, but find someone to do justice to that. And it just seems like from the get-go, the vision for this series has just been so counter, at least to my own Green Lantern sensibilities. And while I can appreciate that if we total it up, I'm sure there probably are more Green Lantern stories set on Earth than in space, although there have been a lot more Green Lantern comics in the last 15 to 20 years than there used to be. So maybe that's not accurate anymore. I'm not sure, especially if we're accounting for the entire mythology of Green Lanterns at this point in the full emotional spectrum. But I just feel like even if the counter says there are more stories on Earth, when did Green Lantern literally and figuratively take off as a comic book property. That is a more recent event. It just is. And that was from expanding out into space. And also in terms of just differentiating the slate for DC Studios, most of their stories are going to be set on Earth, as far as we can tell so far. If not all of these stories so far are going to be Earthbound. So Green Lantern is a story that can be set in space and automatically differentiate itself in that way. All that said, we've known for a while that this was going to be an Earth-based, a terrestrial Green Lantern story, and that is not necessarily my automatic problem of, oh, here's why it's a concern, is it's space or bust for GL. That's not really the way that I feel about it. You can have an Earth-based GL story, but when you keep saying grounded over and over and over again, I start to get suspicious, because unfortunately, a story being grounded, it's supposed to really be more. When I think of a story being grounded, I think of it as being emotionally grounded. The emotions of the characters and their experiences are authentic. Unfortunately, grounded is also used interchangeably with realistic or realism, especially because the word grounded got a lot more popular in being associated with comic book movies, with the Nolan Batman movies, which I love and adore, the Dark Knight trilogy to this day. So I'm not retroactively throwing that one under the bus, but much in the way, going back to the previous question, that the Dark Knight Returns has kind of informed a lot of sensibilities, for better and for worse, about Batman. The Nolan trilogy has informed what a lot of people perceive as what is or isn't grounded in a superhero story. I just 100% am not looking for emotional realism in Lanterns. Great, should definitely have that. Physical realism in Lanterns, no need for it. Not interested. And that's where I am very concerned. I am very concerned that we are going to see Hal and John walking around in plain clothes with a ring that kind of glows sometimes, and we're not really going to see, because I don't see them walking around. And I mean, I hope they're flying. I hope they're not walking. I hope they're not taking the bus. But I'm a little concerned about that at this point, because I just feel like at some point Green Lantern is just begging to be launched out into space and get into that scale of storytelling. If they want to start small and build from there, I guess that's fine. If they really want to find something that is literally and figuratively grounded, to try, and if they feel like they have to do that to make it more palatable to an audience, which they should know better. James Gunn from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise should definitely know better. I'm just confused by a lot of the approach to Lantern so far, and I keep trying very hard to find reasons to be excited about this project, because I desperately want to be excited about this project. I should be excited about this project. They're just not giving me those reasons. And that's not to say, I want to be clear, I'm not disparaging Kyle Chandler or Aaron Pierre, who've been cast as Hal and John respectively. It's not about the actors. It's about the story they appear to be being placed into. It might be a really good story, but even the way James Gunn characterized it as making a really good Max series, we in our text thread with our pal Robert, I'd sum it up this way. I'm not just looking for a great story that just so happens to have a couple guys you're calling Green Lanterns in it. I want it to be the kind of great story you could only tell because you've got Green Lanterns in it. That's what I'm looking for, and I'm just not seeing it yet.
Yeah. there's a lot there, but yeah, I mean, I knew you felt strongly about it, and just that last point again is, I mean, that was what frustrated me about the Penguin, is people are being like, well, you can't think of it as a comic book show. You have to think of it as an HBO show. And I'm like, well, I don't want to think about it as an HBO show. It's called The Penguin. That's what I want.
I could just watch an HBO show.
Yeah, and the same thing about Lanterns, and that was the one thing that he said where I was like, oh, don't say that. Don't be like, don't think of it as a Green Lantern show. Think of it as an HBO show. No, it's a Green Lantern show, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
think of it as the thing it's being called. I really do. Like, that's the way it should work.
Right. I want it to be the thing it's based on. I'm weird like that. And so, I think I'm a little more optimistic about it than you are, because again, for me, being set on Earth is not a big deal. I don't mind that. And that's what you said. It's grounded because it's set on Earth. Great. I'm fine with that. But they still better be Green Lanterns. That's what it
Exactly.
comes down to. Is
They
like,
better be
is
flying around, making constructs and the costumes and everything. I'm not excited about Hal and John walking around in trench coats.
exactly. And so that's still to be seen. And the fact that he kind of dodged that aspect of the question, I'm like, okay, well, hopefully, hopefully that means
It's not a spoiler if they wear costumes. That should just be a yes.
right. But what gives me hope is twofold. Number one, James Gunn, we just talked about, is this the guy who can't wait to put Robin in a movie? This is the guy who, if anyone's going to put Clayface in a movie, it's going to be him. He loves that part of the DC universe. So I find it really hard to believe that he is going to shrink away from what makes Green Lanterns special.
Yep.
Like, he's such a nerd. Like, how could he not want to do Green Lanterns right?
Right.
And so much so that he has a Green Lantern in Superman who is going to be flying around making constructs. And guess what? This is all part of the same universe. So the Guy Gardner in Superman is on the same team as Hal and John from the Lanterns show. So there's got to be some overlap there as far as like the level of Green Lantern, whatever fantasy you want to call it. They have to be part of the same core. And so that also gives me a little hope, is we know he's not going to hold back with Guy Gardner and Superman. So it would be a really odd choice to then, play down the Green Lanternness in the show.
Those are all great points. And those are the thoughts that I am clinging to.
Right.
That's what I am holding on to for dear life right now, in hopes that this series is ultimately going to be something that I absolutely love. Because despite whatever concerns and worries I have over it, all that comes from how badly I want to love it. That's not me taking any pride in rejecting it. I don't want to reject it. I want to welcome this show with open arms into my heart and love it like crazy, because that's what I've wanted for Green Lantern in live action for a long time. And so I absolutely want to love it. And I do think over the course of this show and various appearances that I've been lucky enough to have here on Holy BatCast, as well as my own podcast over on MCU Fan Show, I think my admiration for James Gunn as a storyteller is abundantly clear, and my general appreciation for him and his talent and his vision. That is actually why it's so confusing to me to hear what I'm hearing so far about Lanterns from him, or hear what I'm not hearing from him, because it runs so counter to how I normally think of James Gunn and his approach to things. So I do hope that ultimately it just comes down to everybody being way more cagey than they needed to be about what was really going on with the show. And by the time we catch a glimpse of it, and maybe that confidence starts to build with, of course, Guy Gardner and Superman, and then it just continues to go from there. That this is not as much of a show that I'm a Lanterns in name only show, a Lanterns in half name only show that it appears to be right now. So I am still clinging to hope that this will be that type of show where, again, not just a good show that happens to be called Lanterns, but a good show because it's got Green Lanterns in it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, the other tidbit that, he didn't give us a release window for Lanterns, but he did say it was always planned to come out around the same time as Superman. So that is also interesting.
Yeah. Although, could they, have they started shooting yet?
No, but they're supposed to start shooting beginning of the year.
Okay. Then coming out, if they're shooting beginning of the year, I can't imagine they're ready by Superman in July. So I'm thinking that feels more like late 2025 at the earliest, but maybe more Q1 2026.
We'll see. Again, and he didn't commit to it, but that was the statement. I could see it coming out fall, by the time Superman comes home, it could
the earlier it comes out from the start of production, the more worried I'm going to be that it's like, oh,
because of the effects.
Turn around a lot of construct VFX. That's why they could put this out so fast.
Yeah, it could be. But yeah, like Supergirl and Lanterns are supposed to start production first thing in 2025. So we'll wait and see. But again, I guess the point I'm making is like to even release it in the vicinity of Superman when you've already introduced another Green Lantern, like there's got to be some continuity there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have plenty more emails, but I have a baby waiting, and Sean's got to get along with his day. So all the other emails I'm going to set aside until the next episode. I'm not throwing them away. We'll read them next time. I knew that opening up the Lantern can of worms would take some time, but that's okay. You were here, so I figured let's go for it. But anyway, thank you to everybody who's written in. Again, the other emails will wait until next time. But if you've got something to send to us, you can send that to Holy BatCast at rf4rm.com. Thus, we're going to wrap up this episode of the show. Sean, always a pleasure having you back. Thanks for taking some time this morning to talk some Creature Commandos and then eventually some Green Lantern.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to rant/ramble about lanterns. And so I appreciate that, and apologize for the trademark long-winded nature of it, but I appreciate that. But also thank you very much for having me on to talk about Creature Commandos, because despite my concerns about lanterns, I'm still very, very, very pro James Gunn co-running things for DC Studios, and to get his first official project under that banner, even if he came up with it before he got the job. They obviously did most of the work on this and finished it under his current role for DC Studios. And as this soft launch / bridge, I was really looking forward to it and delighted to have actually enjoyed the show. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to come on and talk about it.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's always good to get back and catch up and talk some DC. So, and you know what, the long-winded nature.
Wayne Manor mailbox. Great questions, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say the long-winded nature is, we know what we're getting when we have Sean Gerber, and that's okay. Absolutely. That's part of your charm.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
You mentioned the MCU fan show, but anything else that you listeners could go find you?
That's the main one. MCU fan show is the podcast that I've still got going. So you can check that out wherever you found Holy BatCast. You can find MCU fan show. If you also like the Marvel of it all, that's where you can find me.
Terrific. Well, thank you as well. And thank you everybody out there for listening and for downloading or streaming the show. We appreciate you so much for taking a little time out of your week to listen to us geek out about such geek things. You can follow or subscribe to the show wherever you found it. We would love that, and you never miss an episode, even though, again, the episodes are going to be a little more sporadic for a little bit. And again, thank you so much for your understanding. You also can rate and review us. That's something else you can do that doesn't cost a penny, but it's super helpful. A 5-star review goes a long way in helping us, and also makes me feel good about myself, so I would love that. You can find the show, as always, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast. If you got something for the Wayne Manor mailbox, that email address again is holybatcast@rf4rm.com. Our theme music was created by the talented Gaurav Venkateswar. You can find his work at gvtunes.com. And that will do it. So thanks for joining us. On behalf of Sean, I've been Andy. We'll see you next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. Holy BatCast is not affiliated with Warner Brothers or DC Entertainment. The views and opinions shared by the participants are theirs and theirs alone and do not represent the companies or organizations they happen to work for. Before we talk about the show, I want to get a little... Excuse me. Still got that morning thing going. My coffee in my throat.